I am pleased to present to you today subject matter experts on the important and critical topic of end-of-life benefits. And in fact, I was just having a quick conversation before this started of definitions. I've looked at the slides and I've already learned a lot. So hopefully this will be informative for everybody. For our meeting today, Kaylin Williams will moderate the program. Kaylin is the Hospice Volunteer Coordinator for Penn Medicine at Home. Kaylin, all you.
Thank you, Hugo, and welcome to our panelists. As you listen to the presentations, please put your questions in the chat box. If your question is for a particular presenter, please state that it is. At the end of the presentations, we will ask the panelists for any of the questions, as many of the questions as time permits. Any unanswered questions will be sent to the presenters with your name and email address, so please put your email address in the chat box as well. Our first presenter today is Deborah Way. Dr. Way is a board-certified internist, geriatrician, and palliative care provider. She recently retired as a director of palliative care services at the Corporal Michael J. Crescent's VA Medical Center in Philadelphia, PA. She also held an academic appointment as Associate Professor of Clinical Medicine in a division of Geriatric Medicine at Perelman School of Medicine in Philadelphia, PA. Her mission is to provide excellent end-of-life care to veterans and to teach others to do the same. For the past 10 years, Dr. Way has used VA policy and resources to create programs that support veterans with serious illness from diagnosis to end of life. She established a multidisciplinary team that works with veterans and their families during their time of need. She believes her biggest achievement is the collaboration between community-based services in the VA to provide care to veterans wherever they call home.
Well, thank you very much, Kaylin. I would like to introduce my colleague, Dr. Erin Haley, who I'm not sure where she is on your grid view. Erin is my successor, and I will say it's Deborah Way 2.5, not 2.0. Erin is going to co-present with me today, and I am really happy to be here. Can you give me the next slide, please? So in the 1980s, 1984 to be exact, there was a law passed that established and defined the Medicare hospice benefit. And so that is the template by which all hospice rules and regulations are applied. So again, defined by law, and it is a Medicare hospice benefit, and other insurance companies follow the same template, but don't always provide the same breadth of services. So when I say hospice, I'm usually referring to Medicare. So hospice care is care for a person with terminal illness. Two physicians must agree that the prognosis for this person is 6 months or less. The person in question and their family agree to comfort-directed care. And hospice, if you are receiving the hospice benefit, you cannot pursue active life-prolonging cure-directed treatment. So that is the very basis of hospice care. And there are a lot of questions that people have. Is this medication covered? Is this service covered? And I will tell you that the people to ask are either with respect to the VA, it's me, Erin. You can touch base with Fern if you can. Hold of her as well. May I have the next slide, please? Again, Medicare hospice benefits defines hospice services at 4 levels. So the first is routine level of care. And where that is provided is wherever a veteran calls home or a person calls home. If you live at home with your family, that's where hospice services are provided. And what is provided is not 24-hour care. It is a nurse visit a couple of times a week, potentially a home health aide several times a week for several hours. It is medications, physician oversight of care, and DME, durable medical equipment, a hospital bed, or any other kind of thing that you could think of, a commode, a bedside table, supplies, a volunteer, chaplain, and all of this is provided with all levels of care except for routine level care is at home, or if somebody lives in a nursing home or assisted living the services are provided there. Again, routine level of care is meant to supplement the basic level of care usually provided by either the family or the staff at the facility.
We've been waiting and waiting. I've seen so many moments.
General inpatient level of care is for people who need symptoms managed that can't be managed reasonably in any other setting. So general inpatient level of care is usually provided in an inpatient hospice unit. Unfortunately, the number of inpatient hospice units in this neighborhood area is dwindling. So we just lost the inpatient hospice unit at Penn. And so that actually puts a lot of pressure on hospices to be able to provide excellent intensive symptom management in other settings. And they are currently doing that at, I think, Pennsylvania Hospital. They have a few beds where they do that. Also at the VA, there's a hospice and palliative care unit, which is for veterans who have a diagnosis that says that they're going to die within the next 3 months. And we can talk more about that in questions if that comes up. The next level of care is respite level of care. Every hospice agency is required to provide what they call a respite level of care for 5 days maximum. And this is determined to be on a periodic basis. So years and years ago, when I worked for a community-based hospice, we allowed for people to have respite level of care 5 days a month. That is determined by each hospice. It doesn't happen that often anymore. Respite is for the patient who lives in the home, who has a caregiver who needs some respite from having to care. So the patient goes from home to another location for 5 days, and the caregivers or the families can get some relief from sometimes a really heavy burden of care. And then finally, continuous care is care that is provided in the home 24 hours a day. And that I've never seen that happen. That is for people who have such intensive level of symptoms that they can't be managed except for if there's a nurse there 24 hours a day. And they're unsafe to be transferred. So usually what happens when somebody has really intense symptoms, they're moved to a GIP, general inpatient level of care setting. But in the cases where somebody cannot be moved for safety reasons, continuous care is provided in the home by an RN. And documentation, it needs to be meticulous, and it's really hard to staff. So there might be people here who have seen continuous care done. I will tell you, I've been doing this for 20 years. I've never seen it done. But it does exist. May I have the next slide, please? So that's the basics of hospice care. The VA is a separate animal, as everyone knows. And so the VA, in its infinite wisdom, a number of years ago in the early 2000s, decided that every veteran should be entitled to hospice care as part of their healthcare benefits. So if you are a veteran, you're enrolled at the VA, you automatically are entitled to hospice care, provided you meet the eligibility guidelines that I talked about earlier: 6-month prognosis, 2 doctors, 6-month prognosis, 2 doctors, foregoing curative care. The VA does not provide hospice care. The VA contracts with community hospice agencies like Penn Medicine at Home, like some other agencies that I won't bring up because I don't know that they're here, but we communicate really heavily with community-based hospice agencies, and we, under many circumstances, will fund hospice care because the veteran, I'm sorry, I just lost my place here. So the veteran has the option for VA to fund their hospice care. So if a veteran is entitled to Medicare and chooses for Medicare to fund their hospice, that's fine. If the veteran has Medicare and chooses for the VA to fund their hospice care, or the veteran doesn't have insurance, they can choose for the VA to fund their hospice care. I don't know whether or not I made that clear, but the VA will pay for hospice for an enrolled veteran. So may I have the next slide, please? What's different about the VA and hospice? The VA does pay 100%. The routine level of care is wherever a veteran calls home, and I already did say that. But, and this is huge, if the veteran's not able to stay in their home for one reason or another, through the Office of Community Care, the VA will provide room and board at a community nursing home that is contracted with the VA. Huge, 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 very different than the outside world. So the veteran is eligible for hospice. The VA will provide funding for the facility stay and will provide funding for hospice. So it's essentially if a veteran is so ill, they can't stay at home, they meet eligibility guidelines for hospice, they can stay completely funded at a community nursing home where they will receive around-the-clock care plus hospice. If a veteran no longer meets eligibility guidelines for hospice, so in other words, we thought that they were declining, and all of a sudden they're gaining weight, they're regaining function for one reason or another, and they no longer meet eligibility guidelines for hospice, then the care cannot be provided in the nursing home any longer. The other limitation is that there are no additional services funded, including PT, OT, speech and language pathology, treatment. So if somebody goes to a nursing home for hospice care, they do not get these other services. They get only what we call custodial services. I'm seeing a lot of questions come up. Should I stop, or do you want to save them to the end?
I'm answering some as they come in, Deborah.
Oh, excellent, Erin. Okay, part two, the next slide. What is different about the VA and hospice? In the Medicare world, which is the way that I've been talking about this for 10 years, because I've been outside the Medicare world for 10 years. In the Medicare world, if a person goes to the hospital, unless their diagnosis is completely unrelated to their hospice diagnosis, so for instance, if they have COPD and that's what they're on hospice for, and they develop a urinary tract infection that causes sepsis, unless it's completely separate, a person who goes to the hospital must be discharged from hospice. Or the hospice agency need to keep track of what's going on in hospital because the funding stream is the same as Medicare A for both of them. So somebody goes to the hospice for a diagnosis that's completely unrelated to their hospice diagnosis, they do not have to be discharged from hospice. If they go to the hospital for a pneumonia, it could be said that it's related to their COPD. If they go to the hospital for a COPD exacerbation, it's related to their hospice diagnosis, so they must be discharged. If this sounds confusing to you, that's because it is. It's completely confusing. But if a veteran is admitted to a VA hospital for 5 nights or fewer, the hospice does not need to discharge for any reason, even if it's related to the terminal diagnosis. It's a VA hospital, 5 nights or less, a person who's on hospice in the community goes to the hospital. The hospice does not need to discharge them, but they must continue to provide care and show that through documentation. That's by visits or phone calls to the veteran, phone calls to the family. It must occur at least twice during the stay, and the hospice must continue to do active case management and collaboration with the VA provider and the social work staff at the VA facility, and help provide for seamless integration back home. If the veteran is admitted for more than 5 nights, they must be discharged from hospice. That was a lot of confusing information. I will say that that is a lot of confusing information. And it gets even better because Erin's going to pick up and talk about the most amazing thing that we have to talk about, and that is concurrent care, which is the next slide.
Thank you so much, Deborah, for letting me be part of this. And I will highlight that Deborah taught me all that I know about caring for veterans at the end of life. And so it's really a pleasure to get to present with her one more time. So concurrent care is a buzzword that we would recommend that you take note of. If you're taking notes, write this down because it hopefully is the wave of the future. The way that we care for veterans currently is under concurrent care, meaning veterans can concurrently receive hospice care as well as continue other care that they were already receiving, whether that be palliative treatments for their cancer, for example. So not cure directed, but palliative, meant to palliate or make symptoms better. Veterans can receive cancer care like that, radiation care that could help with pain. They can continue to see their heart failure doctor, their kidney doctor, their lung doctor, their liver doctor, and their primary care physicians and providers who they've built relationships with. So concurrent care means that veterans can concurrently or at the same time receive that hospice care that Deborah was discussing, but continue on with those palliative treatments or palliative care that they have already been getting. The caveat is that the VA is not able to provide duplicative services. And so if a veteran was receiving home skilled care, like home nursing, that was helping with a wound, or they were helping with complicated medication management in the home, and that was being provided to that veteran, they were benefiting from it. But then the veteran decides to enroll on hospice, which also includes skilled nursing care that can help with wounds and complex medication management. That veteran just can't receive both because that would be receiving like 2 skilled nursing cares at the same time. So the VA would not be able to fund both of those things. They could only fund one. The other most common example for not being able to provide duplicative services is veterans who might have been receiving intensive physical therapy in the home. Home hospices must provide some level of home physical therapy, mostly for safety evaluations. So it becomes a little bit hard if the veteran is asking to continue intensive physical therapy and receive hospice. Appropriate concurrent care can include things like additional home health aid visits. If a veteran already has a service-connected condition for which they're receiving home health aid support, home caregiver support, they can continue those things and also get hospice. If veterans have really extensive wound care needs that the hospice evaluates and feels they can't appropriately treat, we're allowed to call in backup and ask for really expert wound care to come in. As I already mentioned, sort of simple rehabilitation needs like safety evaluations by physical therapy, help from occupational therapy in how to help a Parkinson's patient eat well despite their tremor, or assessments for family to be able to even use like durable medical equipment like Hoyer lifts to lift their loved one out of bed. We can provide those services too. Next slide, please. The most important thing to remember about concurrent care is really that definition that we already talked about, that the veteran can get hospice, but also receive treatments of palliative intent that they were already receiving. In the Medicare world, we call it the terrible choice. People who are not veterans must decide if they want to get hospice or continue their treatments that they were already receiving, like see their primary care providers that they've known for decades. or continue on with some palliative treatments like cancer-directed care that may not be prolonging their life extensively, but was making them feel better because it was controlling the cancer. Veterans do not need to make the terrible choice. They're allowed to continue both. So provider visits, medications that are important to them and might actually even be providing comfort, like their heart failure medications or their routine blood pressure medications. Those can still be continued. Whereas for Medicare patients on hospice, a lot of those are stopped because they're too expensive. Veterans can continue with infusions for their medical needs, as well as transfusions if their blood counts go low. If that will help their quality of life to get a blood transfusion, they're able to do that. Radiation, as well as procedures that can help with comfort, but might mean that that veteran had to come into the medical center to have it done by a skilled professional. So those things can still continue. This is the cornerstone of VA concurrent care. And the reason I said to write it down, in your notebook is that we hope this is the wave of the future, because we hope that the Medicare world will take the example of the VA and actually make this available for non-veterans too. Next slide, please. And I'm just going to check in the chat, Deborah. I don't know if anything specific came up relating to concurrent care.
I think I'm seeing a lot of minds being blown based on the chat. So concurrent care, not every VA does concurrent care the same way that the Crescent's VA does it. And I'll say that because we are very lucky to work with hospices who understand what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so that email address that you see currently, and we're trying to get through the hairy parts of it, that email address currently doesn't work. But if you call that number, you're going to get either Damaris or one of us. And no, not one of us, not me, but one of the palliative care team. I'm sorry, I keep forgetting I'm not there anymore. You're going to get somebody who's going to be able to answer your question. And no, we can't help with the paperwork for Agent Orange. I'm sorry.
The reason that we can't help with such claims is because that would be a conflict of interest. Of course, we want every veteran to get every possible benefit that they can. But because folks like Deborah and I are physicians that are treating that patient, we aren't able to determine if the problems that they're having now is related to their Agent Orange exposure. That's done through Veteran Benefits Administration. And so we don't help with that ourselves. But we do request that you please write down our cell phone number, please write down the email, and please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. And even if we can't help with it specifically, we will do everything we can to get the veteran you're working with sent to the right place. Thank you.
I'm seeing a lot of questions. I think maybe in the interest of time, I can respond to them in the chat, and also I'll be able to stay online for the panel at the end.
All right, thank you, Dr. Way and Aaron, for an informative presentation. So I will now present on volunteer programs focusing on end-of-life care. I've been with Penn Medicine since 2021, supporting patients and their families with volunteers who provide a number of services, including but not limited to companionship and caregiver relief. Through the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organizations program, we honor veterans. The volunteer department and volunteers provide care packages and vet-to-vet support for newly admitted veterans on our service. Prior to working with Penn Medicine, I served as a volunteer for the Peace Corps in Mongolia from May 2017 to March of 2020, working as a health educator in the Southern Gobi region. I moved to the capital Ulaanbaatar to serve a third year as a volunteer leader for the Peace Corps and a volunteer trainer for an NGO named Beautiful Hearts, whose primary focus is the protection and safety of women and children who are victims of domestic and sexual violence. All right, next slide, please. And so when a patient is admitted onto hospice services, the primary care team consists of the nurse for pain and symptom management, the social worker for emotional and practical support, and then the chaplain for any religious or spiritual support. Other disciplines are involved in the patient's care depending on the patient's condition. And so when thinking of the care team in hospice, what other supportive measures can be offered for patients and families? While volunteers also play a crucial role in providing support to our patients and their families, which is why hospice organizations are required to provide them by Medicare. And while patients having volunteers in a home is not required, it is highly recommended if a patient is in need of companionship, presence, or if the family is in need of caregiver relief for a well-deserved break. Our patient visitors travel mainly by car, public transport, or on foot to patient visits in their homes, senior living facilities, or rehabilitation centers to meet them where they are and to provide companionship within the comfort of their own space. You also see some other services here that volunteers provide, such as bereavement services, knitting, crocheting, Reiki, pet therapy, and baking. Next slide, please. So paramedicine at home and various hospices throughout the country feature the We Honor Veterans campaign as a part of volunteer services. The National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization, or NHPCO for short, collaborates with the VA to encourage partnerships between hospices, state hospice organizations, and VA facilities. It focuses on working with these partners to provide information and quality care to our vets so we can better join in serving so we can join in a better serving and honoring our nation's veterans. You will see on the right side of the slide the levels of commitment We Honor Veterans use to determine how integrated a hospice organization is with its goals. If a hospice organization has met the criteria, they will be recognized on the We Honor Veterans website as a level that they have achieved. For example, paramedicine at home has achieved a level 4. So We Honor Veterans creates a culture that is veteran-centric. So what does that mean? We help them identify what their needs are, and we recognize that there may be some baggage that comes along with what it means to be a veteran. Different disciplines are making sure that the vet's needs are being met with communication, coordination, and collaboration. And this is not just within our organization, but other organizations such as the VA. We cannot understand the uniqueness of veteran experiences. They come from a wide variety of backgrounds that they share, and they share a special relationship with our country. And while they are connected with the VA, they are seen by community hospice agencies like us. So it's our job to meet their needs and goals. Most veterans are going to be in a community setting, such as their own homes, senior living facilities, and rehabilitation centers. And so it will be all about meeting them where they are and making sure that we are meeting those unique and specialized needs. Next slide, please. So as a part of the We Honor Veterans campaign, special packages are provided to vets when they are admitted onto service. They will receive a certificate of service, a flag pin, a thank you card handmade by our volunteers, and a red, white, and blue blanket that is also handmade by our volunteers. Once prepared by the volunteer department, they are given to the care teams to deliver to the patient's homes. It is a great way to open up a discussion either between the patient and the care team or the patient and family, as this may have been the first time that they have ever heard of any stories their loved one has to share. Of course, these packages are optional, as you know, there are vets out there who would not want to talk about or be reminded of their service. So one additional program that isn't mentioned in this slide is No Vet Dies Alone. It's also provided by the We Honor Veterans campaign. This program, similar to Vet, which we're going to talk about in the next slide, is focused on companionship and presence. The difference between the two is that No Vet Dies Alone trains volunteers to engage with veterans whose family members or friends are unable to be near them at the end of life. At this current time, pet medicine does not offer this service. However, it is still an important initiative that is being carried out through various hospice organizations through the country. Next slide, please. Okay, so the Vet to Vet program focuses on providing a unique experience that is just as unique as their service. An average civilian cannot understand the psychosocial element that is involved when interacting with a veteran, and so no one would be better in taking on that role than another vet. Veterans are able to provide a level of companionship that may be more beneficial than the average volunteer, as they are able to better relate and connect with them. They share a common language, a code of conduct, and an honor. And as a result, this creates a comfortable environment where life review and healing may occur. So in conclusion, volunteers are an integral part of the care team on hospice and offering presence through a caregiver relief and compassionate presence. If you know of anyone who may benefit from volunteer services, please contact your hospice organization's volunteer department for more information. If you'd like to be a volunteer, you may also reach out to them or fill out an application form that can be usually found on their website. Okay, I'm not sure if I saw some questions pop up in the chat here. Oh, okay. Are there specific requirements or training to be a volunteer? So yes. So depending on the hospice organization that you're applying to, they might have different requirements, but what is all across the board is they do have to have background checks. The volunteers have to have background checks depending on if they're going to be in a community or not. They have to have, well, depending on if they drive or not, they would have to have their driver's license and auto insurance. You also have to have a list of vaccinations. So you would need to have, like, for example, your MMR vaccination record, your, let me think, MMR, your varicella, your flu shot when the season comes around, your COVID vaccination card, depending on the hospice. I think right now at the time that it is a requirement though. And then a few other vaccination records. And then you're also going to need, again, this is dependent on the organization. You're going to need you're going to need recommendations. You're going to need to fill out some paperwork, and you are going to have to complete some trainings. And so, for example, for Pet Medicine at Home, we have a 3-part training. And so you have, well, a 3-part orientation. And so you have to submit your medical records, your documents, and then you have your online modules, your trainings, and then the 3rd part is a virtual training that we'll all complete as a cohort. So that's what that looks like. So is there a large need for volunteers? Oh, absolutely. So when a patient is admitted onto service, the members of the care team will have a conversation with the patient or the family just to see what their specific needs are. And as I mentioned before, it will be dependent on that patient's needs, on what discipline is involved in a patient's level of care. And so if there is a need, let's say not a lot of family members come around to visit, or the caregiver is very, very overwhelmed and needs a well-deserved break, then there will be a need for a volunteer. And so what seems to be the most popular is caregiver relief, because of the fact that, you know, we have a lot of caregivers who are very overwhelmed, who doesn't have anyone to rely on so that they can get out of the house for a bit to maybe run errands or go to any doctor's appointments. And so it's kind of like giving a part of their life back while they are still caring for their loved one. Okay, and if there's no more questions, I can move on here. All right, so our next presenter is Keith Donnell, the personal financial counselor at Biddle Air National Guard Base. Keith is president and founder of Modern Wealth Concepts, LLC. He has more than 30 years of experience working directly with individuals and families as their trusted financial advisor. He is a frequent speaker, writer, and educator on various topics in personal financial management, retirement planning, financial literacy, estate planning, and personal financial management workshops and seminars for the American workforce. Keith has spent 12 years as a military financial counselor embedded with the Pennsylvania National Guard as a contractor. He is also an adjunct professor of finance at St. Joseph University in Philadelphia. Keith holds the Certified Financial Planner Professional designation. He is a member of the Beta Gamma Sigma. He's a member of Beta Gamma Sigma, the International Honor Society for Collegiate Schools of Business. He received an honorable discharge from the United States Marine Corps.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. That was a great program so far. I'm really enjoying some of the information that I'm picking up, things that I didn't know before, which is very useful. I'm going to talk a little bit today about wills, the last will and testament, which I also like to refer to as your last wishes. And just to expand a little bit on my practice, I've been working with the Pennsylvania National Guard as a contractor for the last 12 years. So I've probably visited, I bet, about 70% of the armories in the Philadelphia, in the Pennsylvania area. I've gone to the four corners of the state. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the situations that I typically deal with. And so one of the other things that I do is the VA has a program. It's called Financial Point. I don't know how many of you have heard of that, but I'm an approved provider in Financial Point, which provides up to 40 hours of free financial planning services to survivors of service members that die. And there's two it's available under two programs. One is for service members that are covered by SGLI, and then it's available to the family of service members that were covered by VGLI, which is Veterans Group Life Insurance. So I deal with death quite a bit in my practice. And if we can go to the next slide, please. Great. So I deal with death quite a bit in my practice, and I want to tell you about a typical situation that I see, and it's far too typical as far as I'm concerned, and that is someone dying without a will. And a lot of people are under the misconception that, well, if I don't have a will, my spouse will get everything, or my children will get everything. But dying without a will, especially if you have significant property, is really a problem. I mean, it's a real problem for the people that have to dispose of your estate. And so one situation that I see a lot, I was dealing a number of years back with I was called in to work with a family who the service member, he was in Pennsylvania National Guard, and he died. And he had bought a house and then got married. And he never switched the house over to, he never put the house in joint name. He kept it in his name. And when he died, they had 4 young children. I think the oldest was about 6 or 7, and the youngest was so young he had never actually met the child. And because he died without a will, it took his wife about 2 years to finally dispose of the house. She came into insurance money, and there was a lawsuit and things like that. But when the time came to get rid of the house, she actually had, because the house was not left to her in a will, and her name wasn't on the house, she wound up having to hire an attorney to represent the children's interest. Because what happens is the children's interests are also considered when you die without a will. And so it took her about 2 years of legal bills to finally be able to move that piece of property. And I've probably seen that at least about 10 or 15 times over the years. And so, when people die, they typically, sometimes you see it coming, and you've got plenty of time to get your affairs in order, especially the folks that deal in hospice care and palliative care would probably agree with that. But sometimes you don't see it coming, and then it's too late to get that done. And, you have to be in sound mind in order to do that to get a will, to create a valid will. And so what I encourage people to do is, when the sun is shining brightly and there's no problems and everything is great, that's the time to go out and take care of that. So a will is actually a legal document created by you that communicates your final wishes, right? Which is very important, right? Because you own property, and there are people that you want to take care of. Maybe there's people you don't want to take care of. And your will is how all of that is communicated to the people that matter, to all concerned. And it really deals with the transfer of property that's owned by you. And it also deals with, if you have minor children, how is that going to be handled, right? What do you want done with them? So those are very important aspects. Can we go to the next slide? Great. So let's go through the details of what a will is designed to do. So first off, the will is how property owned fee simple is transferred. And so, there are several ways to own property, right? You can own property like an IRA or 401k, something like that. And that's going to transfer by beneficiary designation, right? Then you have property that's joint tenants with rights of survivorship, or what they call tenants by the entirety. And those are property, those are ownership with survivor rights, meaning that if you pass away, whoever's name is on that property with you will inherit that property. And so you have fee simple, that's between two people. Joint tenants with rights of survivorship are between two people, right? And so, and then families can also have tenants by the entirety, where that would be between spouses, okay? Now, if the property doesn't go that way and you own it outright, like your car or your house in your name or anything like that, then that's fee simple ownership. And fee simple ownership is meant to transfer through a will, right? So you would name the property, or you could just say all of my property that I own, and this is the way I want it transferred. This is the people I want it to go to. The will also names the executor for the probate process. So the probate process is a legal process where your will is looked at, you name the people that you want to inherit property, and that's the process to make that happen. And the executor is the one that you name that's going to take care of that business for you. So they're like the power of attorney for people after death. They get the will, they look at the will, they list all of your property, right? They handle that transfer process under the supervision of the court. You will also would name guardians for your minor children, as I mentioned earlier. It establishes a testamentary trust if necessary. So if you don't want to leave property outright to someone, if you don't want to leave property outright, you would leave it maybe in trust. And an example might be, I have minor children and I want to leave money and money to them, and I don't want to leave it outright because they're minors. And so you might set up a trust. You can set up a trust while you're alive, right? They're kind of expensive to set up, but you could go do that. Or you could set it up so that your will would say, for each of my children, set up a trust, and the executor's job would be to get that trust open. And then finally, when the property is disposed of, to put it into the trust for the benefit of that child. Maybe it's one child, maybe it's all of your children, however you want to do it. The beauty of the will is that you get to specify how you want things done. Okay. Your will also names legatees and specifies inheritances. And so sometimes we hear the term heir, right? So this person is an heir. And an heir is just a person that is eligible to inherit property from you. So your heirs would be, your parents, siblings, your children, your spouse, okay, and on down the line, they would be heirs. So they're all potentials, okay? If you die without a will, all of these people are considered, okay, because they're heirs. Legatees are people that are specifically named in a will. And so most people don't really want to have all these people as potentials. It's very specific. They want my children to inherit, or I want my spouse to inherit all my property, which isn't automatic. I want my children to inherit. I want to take care of my parents, or my siblings are fine, but I have one brother that I want to make sure. These are all people you name in a will, okay? And then it communicates any special instructions that you might have. For instance, you might say, the house is to be sold, and I want it, divided amongst my children, or sell the house, put the money in trust for the children, or I have some very important things. I want jewelry given to my daughter or my son, or I want that to be held for my grandchildren. This is where you get a chance to name property, be very specific about what you want to have happen. If you don't have that will, if you don't have a will structured, then someone else decides. Okay, so they're going to decide who inherits your property, what happens to property. There is no, what I always like to tell people all the time is that the courts don't really respect social relationships. They respect legal relationships and blood relationships. And so it could be that you have a very dear friend, or maybe your child has a godparent or something like that, that you want taken care of, but they aren't people that would ordinarily be taken care of in the process. So if you want that, you have to specify it, and that's going to be done in a will. Okay. Next slide, please. So will preparation, how do we put this thing together? I don't know how many of you saw in the news a couple of days ago where Aretha Franklin, I think she died a few years back, and they finally found a valid, or what they consider to be a valid will. They found it like stuffed in a sofa. Apparently she said apparently she was on, like, she likes to do a lot of work on the sofa, and then just wrote out a will, just basically it looked like a doodle pad or something like that, and then it was stuffed in the sofa, and they found it, right? And so when something like that is going on, that means legal fees happen. That means courts are involved, and maybe for an estate her size, which is multiple millions of dollars, maybe it's not a big deal to blow $1 million or $2 million on legal fees. But for us, mere mortals, where every dollar in my estate is important, and I don't want it tied up in legal fees. And so the type of will she wrote, it is, it can work. Okay, as a last ditch effort, you wrote out something, but that is far from the ideal way to do it. And so a will should be, again, written when you're of sound mind, and maybe not so much body, but of sound mind. Okay, I'm clear, I know what I want, and I can communicate what I want, and witnesses can look at me and see that I'm lucid and I know what I want to do. Okay, it should be written in accordance with the laws of state of residence and updated when necessary. So if you find, by the way, that you're in a hospital bed or something like that, as long as you're clear, a lot of times the hospitals can have somebody come down and notarize documents for you. So when you're trying to, like, deathbed will, I'm in the hospital, I'm still clear, I just need to put this together. Is there anybody here that can come down and notarize for me? I have been involved in those situations, and I've never had a hospital say, no, we don't have anybody that can do that. Normally there's somebody around, but hopefully you don't wait to that point. So anyway, should be written in accordance with the laws of your state of residence and updated when necessary. Okay. Your wishes should be clearly communicated. Think about what you want. Think about what you want to have happen. Kind of think it through. Your will should be signed and witnessed. Okay. A will is what they call a self-proving document, which means it comes with its own witnesses. And ideally, those witnesses are people that don't even know you. They were grabbed walking down the hall. Hey, can you come in and witness this? It doesn't have to be somebody you know. It shouldn't be anyone who's involved in the will, okay? And you want the notary to see them sign it. If you don't have a notary, okay, it's still a will. It's just a little bit weaker. And when I say weaker, it's a little easier to challenge it, right? And so wills can be challenged. And the more haphazard that will is, the easier it is to challenge. Okay. And then you can have a side letter of instruction to explain your intentions. This is a very important part of it. Okay, because if you don't think it through and think about what's going to happen with your property, you want to think about, like, is there anyone that's important to me or that's important to the family that might misunderstand my intentions here, right? Let me give you an example. And I've dealt with this several times. I have 3 children. One is into me for money all the time. They've borrowed so much money from me, I can't even count it all. And the other 2 are self-sufficient, never come to me for anything. And so when I die, my idea is I'm going to forgive all the loans to the one child that I've loaned money to, and then I'm going to divide the money amongst the other 2. Okay, so that child that's cut out will most likely not say, well, mom and dad or mom, forgave what they owed me, and so I'm good. This is great. Most of the time, they look at the other two siblings and go, no, you guys stabbed me in the back. This is a problem. I should have gotten money. They don't see that they've already gotten their inheritance. And so a situation like that is a perfect opportunity to put a side letter of instruction that explains clearly why one was cut out and the other two were given the property, so that they don't go after each other. And so sometimes a poorly written will or the inability to really think it through causes like problems that, you're not going to be around to fix, and they're going to have to sort it out on their own. So it's incredibly important to think it through, make sure you know what you want to do with your property, and then, explain anything that you might think could be misunderstood and that would cause problems in your family. Next slide. And so dying without a will, a judge gets to decide, and that's the bottom line. So I haven't dealt with anything outside of Pennsylvania really. And the way Pennsylvania rules are, if you die without a will, and a lot of times you think your spouse would automatically inherit. It's not the case. Spouses and children are the first in line to inherit, but children have a right to property too. So the spouse would get the spousal share, which they get to declare off the top. It's like $30,000 or so. And then at that point, the property gets split between the spouse and the children, okay? And so if you've got a compound family, meaning second marriage, children from both, it could be a real problem. So what I like to say to people is if you die without a will, that's fine. You'll use the state's will, and the state will ultimately decide who gets what and how that property is distributed. Okay. Just quickly, I want to mention two other documents to go along with this, but we're focusing primarily on wills. But you also want to make sure that when you're doing the will, right, you look at powers of attorney. Okay, so the will kicks in after you die. The will has no power, does nothing until after you die, right? But what I like to call the estate planning gateway is the 6 months right around death, 6 months before, 6 months after. And so what you want to make sure is that first off, beneficiaries are all up to date. You've got it all set up. You got your primaries, you have your contingents, are the people you want. They haven't predeceased you, right? And so you just want to make sure that that's clear. And then you might want to look at a power of attorney. Now, a power of attorney to handle your financial affairs has to be durable, which means it survives mental incapacity. Once you become mentally incapacitated, a regular power of attorney is no good anymore, okay? So it has to specifically say that it survives mental incapacity. The second thing is you want to think about end-of-life instructions. Do not resuscitate orders, maybe a living will, which actually details how you want your end-of-life health care to go. Do I want feeding tubes? Do I not? All of those things. And you want to make sure that your physician knows what your final instructions are going to be, so it's clear, and whoever's going to have that power of attorney, your agent, knows what you want. So at any rate, that's my presentation. Those are the three documents: power of attorney, end-of-life instructions, and the will, which we talked about. If anyone has any questions, I'll be glad to answer now or during our question and answer period. Thank you very much.
All right, one question that just came in is there an online resource or checklist to cover all these requirements?
I usually tell service members in the state to go to the JAG, right, the legal office on base, and get this stuff done, and they do that for them free. In terms of a checklist, not to advertise for anyone, but I kind of like LegalZoom. If it's pretty simple, you go online to LegalZoom and it's pretty well laid out and it's inexpensive to get a will done. I like them if it's just pretty simple. There's not a lot of complexity. If you have some complexity, meaning maybe I've got rental properties, I've got some stuff around, I'm going to need special handling. In that case, you would look at a trust and estates lawyer that can walk you through, or you can look at an elder attorney. Now, I apologize if there's any elder attorneys or trust and estates lawyers on. I don't want to get it twisted, but my perception is over the years, trust and estates lawyers are kind of like the high price spread, right? Those are for people with like a lot of business interests. They tend to be a section of a law firm, and that's kind of expensive. They tend to be more expensive. Elder attorneys tend to deal with us mortals, mere mortals, and so their pricing is a little bit lower, and that would work well. In terms of just having a blank checklist, you can get those online. If you send me a text, I'll give you my phone number, 215-782-1877, and just text me and just say, hey, I heard you and I'm looking for a checklist, and I have some stuff around that I can send.
All right, thank you. And then one last question before we move on. Is the POA that continues after mental decline what you need to avoid a VA judiciary?
I'm not sure about the VA judiciary. I'm not sure about what the requirements would be for that. I've never had to deal with that. But what I can say is that if it's requiring someone else to make decisions for you, then that power of attorney needs to specify that it's durable, or else once you're declared mentally incompetent, that power of attorney is no good anymore if it does not specifically say it survives mental incapacity. And that term is called durable. D-U-R-A-B-L-E, durable.
Okay, and Hugo says the number is 215-782-1877, correct?
That's correct.
All
You can
right.
call or text that line.
All right, well, thank you for your presentation. Our next presenter is Timothy Alexander, the Assistant Supervisor of the Disabled American Veterans, or DAV, National Service Office located in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He began his professional career with the DAV in February 2020 in Chicago, Illinois, as a National Service Officer until his promotion to a current role in July 2022. He honorably served his country from February 1990 until he was injured and medically retired in May 2007. He became an active member of DAV in 2009 and served in various roles at both the local and state levels in Illinois. He remains extremely active with the organization in Pennsylvania and was elected to the position of Department Commander for the DAV Department of Pennsylvania during their department convention held in Harrisburg in June of 2023.
Good morning. Thank you. One real quick thing before I get into my presentation. Someone asked a few minutes ago about a fiduciary with the VA, and if a power of attorney, a civilian power of attorney would suffice. It will not. What would happen if a veteran is in receipt of either disability compensation or a pension from the VA and they are deemed incompetent, the VA will propose to have a fiduciary assigned. At that time, the veteran could request for a family member to be assigned as a fiduciary to them. And then that would start the process of them, numerous forms that they would have to complete that we could assist them with. And then also there would be field interviews with the veteran and a member of the VA's fiduciary hub. So it is a pretty lengthy process, but I did just want to put that out there that they would not recognize that the power of attorney in the case of a fiduciary needing to be assigned to the veteran. Okay, I'm Timothy Alexander. I'm in the Philadelphia DAV National Service Office. Right here is you're looking at the list of our staff. Joseph Kaufman, who is the supervisor of the office, and also a national area supervisor. He has 7 states that he is in charge of overseeing. So I pretty much run all the day-to-day operations within the office. And then we have senior national service officer, Jesse Butler. And then we have 3 trainees currently, Lenny Caminos, Danny Wyatt, and Casey Mayer. And then our 2 support staff, Christine McClowski and Linda Isham. Next slide, please. Okay, here is the contact information for our office. You do see there is a phone number on there. We have 1 phone line coming into our building, and we have numerous calls coming in on a daily basis. There are times that it is difficult to get through on the phones. The best way to reach us is by email. Emails are responded to within, within 48 hours. Next slide, please. Alrighty, the topics that I'm going to be covering today are the predetermination of eligibility for burial in a VA National Cemetery, notification of the claimant's passing, burial benefits, and potential survivor benefits. Next slide, please. All right, the pre-need burial for pre-need determination for burial in a VA cemetery. Any veteran that has been honorably discharged is eligible for this benefit. We highly encourage all of our veterans, if they do not already have, a plot purchased somewhere, to look into this. The veteran can be buried there, their legal spouse, widow or widower, and unmarried children under the age of 21, any of them can be buried in a national cemetery. If you look at the cost of a average, funeral, let's say it's $10,000, at least half of that is going to be the plot, the headstone, and everything that has to be taken care of at the cemetery. All of that is free of charge. So the only thing that the veteran or the surviving spouse would have to pay for is any type of services that their family would want, and then transportation out to the national cemetery. You see, we've got the VA form listed right there, 40-10007. And that is a form that DAV can assist the veteran in completing. And then they will need a copy of their DD-214, their discharge paperwork, and all that paperwork will be submitted to the National Cemetery Office in St. Louis, Missouri. And then they will get a letter in the mail saying that they've been approved to be buried in a cemetery, and please, keep that letter and their DD-214 somewhere where their family is aware of it at the time of their passing. I can tell you that this is a good benefit. It's something I've already done my, pre-need. I know a lot of veterans do, because it just, takes some of the worry and financial stress off of the family at the end if the veteran has not already purchased a plot in a cemetery. Next slide, please. All right, notification of the claimant's passing. This is for if it is for a veteran or for a surviving spouse, it's in receipt of VA benefits. The VA needs to be notified as soon as possible that either the veteran or the surviving spouse passed away, to avoid a potential overpayment. Either the family can call the VA directly, and I have the number right there, it's 800-827-1000, or they can contact DAV. And if we have some basic information on the veteran, their name, branch of service, and the years that they served, we can notify the VA of the veteran's passing. Because we've seen numerous instances where the veteran or surviving spouse pass away, they do not notify the VA of the passing. The monthly checks keep going into the bank. Once the VA realizes that the veteran or the surviving spouse has passed, they'll reach out to whomever the surviving spouse of the family and say, hey, you guys owe us X amount of money. And the other thing that we will do at that time, or if the family calls to notify the VA of the veteran's passing, is request what's called a month of death check, because the VA's payments are similar to the military. They're a month behind. So today's July 21st. If a veteran were to pass away today and we were to call and notify the VA, we would tell that surviving spouse, if a deposit hits your account on August 1st, leave it there. And then, because what the VA will do, they will recoup that money. They'll direct the Treasury Department to go in and pull that money back. And then they will issue a paper check in the amount of whatever the veteran's compensation or pension was for that month, and mail that to the surviving spouse. Next slide. Okay, burial benefits. If the veteran had service-connected disability and the cause of their passing is listed as either the primary or contributing factors on their death certificate, the family can be eligible for up to $2,000 in burial benefits. Basically that, and that's just a straight thing. If the cause of death was not related to a service-connected disability, or if the veteran was hospitalized by the VA at the time of their passing, the family can get $893 back from the VA. Now with both of those, I'm sorry, just with that second one, that $893 one, they would need a, excuse me, they would need a paid invoice from the funeral home to send in with a form that we would help them to complete, to be able to submit to get some of that money back. And then they are also available if they're buried in a private cemetery for headstones, grave markers, presidential memorial certificates, and a flag. Now with the headstones and the markers, there is a request form for that to complete. And on the bottom of that form, there's a section that the cemetery has to complete as well, basically saying that if the VA does provide this headstone or grave marker, that they will install it. Because it's been several years ago, the VA found out that they were ordering, all of these headstones and grave markers, sending them to these cemeteries, and nothing was happening with them. They were not being placed. Now, the VA will provide the headstone or the grave marker at no cost to the family, but if the cemetery, if there's any cost involved on their end to install it, that would be the responsibility of the family. Next slide, please. Okay, potential survivor benefits. There are two types of benefits available to a surviving spouse: a dependency indemnity compensation, or DIC, and a survivor's pension. The surviving spouse must have been married to the veteran for at least 1 year prior to their passing for either one of these benefits. The DIC, let's see, the veteran died on active duty training, or inactive duty training, where they passed away from a service-connected disability as either the primary or contributing factors. And even if, an example of this, let's say the veteran served in Vietnam, he had prostate cancer, he died from the prostate cancer, that would be a DIC claim. Now, there are instances where the veteran will come down with cancer related to herbicide exposure in Vietnam. They will not have an opportunity to put in a compensation claim before they pass. We see that a lot, where a veteran will be diagnosed and within a month they're gone. We can still, attempt to file for that DIC benefit on behalf of the surviving spouse. And we would put a statement with it saying, if the veteran were alive today and filed this claim, more than likely you would grant it. Therefore, you should grant the benefit to the surviving spouse. Because most of us, national service officers with the DAV, we truly understand that, the husbands and the wives of the veterans, they fight just as much of the battles as we did. They may not deploy, they may not go to combat, but they keep everything going, back here while we're deployed. So we, take the best care of our surviving spouses as we can to get them any benefits that they're entitled to. Next slide, please. All right, here's some more of the basic requirements for the DIC. The veteran was in receipt of 100% disability compensation or total disability based on individual unemployability, TDIU, for at least 10 years. And if the surviving spouse remarried on or after December 16th of 2003 and was 57 years of age or older, they would qualify. If the surviving spouse remarried on or after January 5th of 2021 and was 55 years of age or older, they could also potentially qualify for this benefit. And DAV is currently working to try to get that 55 dropped or reduced, because if you think about it, if we had a young service member, say in their 20s, deployed today, they're married, their spouse is in their 20s, why should that spouse have to wait 30 plus years to remarry to get any potential benefits based on their veteran service? Next slide, please. All right, the survivor's pension. The surviving spouse must have been married to the veteran for 1 year prior to their passing. Before September 7th, 1980, the veteran must have served at least 90 days of active duty with 1 day of wartime service. Now, this doesn't mean that the veteran would have had to deploy. All it means is if they were in during the Vietnam era, if they were in during Desert Storm, Iraq, or Afghanistan during that period, that would be their 1 day of wartime service. After September 7th, 1980, the veteran must have served at least 24 months on active duty or the full period for which they were called up to active duty with at least 1 day of wartime service. Now, that second bullet pertains more to like the reserves and the National Guard. If they're only called up, say for 9 months, they do 1 month within, a wartime service, and then they pass away from a service connected. If they pass away from a service connected disability, they would be entitled to the DIC. But, as long as they serve the entire period that they were called up to active duty with at least 1 day during a period of war, the surviving spouse could potentially qualify for that survivor's pension. Next slide, please. Okay, additionally, surviving children under the age of 18 or under the age of 23 and attending a VA approved school or were unable to care for themselves due to a disability before the age of 18 are potentially eligible. We see this a lot where you have children with, some type of mental disability where they were deemed helpless as a child. The parent was taking care of them. The parent is the veteran and they pass away. Or even if the surviving spouse is currently taking care of them, let's say the surviving spouse and the veteran were only married for 6 months. That surviving spouse would not be eligible for the survivor's pension, but he or she could apply for the pension on behalf of that helpless child. All right, the survivor's pension is an income and net worth need basis. The net worth, and this is for 2023, this usually does go up a little each year. The net worth cannot exceed $150,538. This does not include the primary residence and 1 vehicle. Now, the only exception to the primary residence, we saw this a lot when I was in our Chicago office in the Midwest. Let's say it's a farming family. They have a house and they've got 100 acres of farmland. They would not look at the house and they would not look at up to 2 acres of that land. The rest of that land, they would look at the fair market value of the rest of that land. And if it would be above the $150,538, that surviving spouse more than likely would not qualify for that benefit, because the way the VA looks at it, that is land that they can sell to get money to care for themselves. Next slide, please. All right, the annual income is one thing that they look at. And when they talk about annual income, it's from all sources: pensions, Social Security, annuities, IRAs, basically anything that they have coming in. A lot of people get upset about this one when we tell them, because they say, Social Security is money that we paid in. Why does it count as income? I honestly can't tell you why. That's just the way the laws and regulations are written. So, unfortunately, we have to, abide by the laws and regulations set forth by the VA. And their annual income cannot exceed $16,037. Now, one thing that can help offset this is if they have a lot of out-of-pocket medical expenses that can be used to help offset that. So let's say that their annual income is $20,000 and they've got $7,000 worth of medical bills that the VA would, take into consideration for out-of-pocket medical expenses. That could reduce them and potentially get them to the level where they would qualify for the pension. There's also a 3-year look back on assets to make sure that, if a surviving spouse transfers property to a friend, a family member, whatever the case may be, or that they sell it to them, that they're getting fair market value for it. Using that example, that farm again, that 98 acres of land, if they went in and saw that, the surviving spouse sold it to somebody for $5, that is what the VA considers basically asset dumping. They're trying to get rid of assets that they have and money that they have to be able to qualify for this pension, because the whole premise behind the survivor's pension is to keep them at the federal poverty level, which currently this year is at $16,037. Next slide, please. Okay, aid and attendance. Aid and attendance and housebound. This is not a standalone benefit. The surviving spouse or the veteran, because veterans can qualify for that as well, they must be eligible for either for the surviving spouse for the DIC or the survivor's pension, or if it is a veteran, they must be entitled to and receiving either disability compensation or a veteran's pension. And what the aid and attendance does, it pays additional money each month to cover the cost of home health care services, assisted living facilities, or nursing homes. The one thing that we tell both all of our veterans and all their all of our surviving spouses, when they apply for a survivor's pension, not the DIC, but when they apply for the survivor's pension, any changes to their income or their medical expenses, up or down, needs to be reported to the VA as soon as possible. Because what that could do, it could increase the amount of their pension that they're receiving every month. Or if they go out and hit the lottery, it could decrease their the amount that they're receiving. And we see it more times than not that people do not report it to the VA. You know, let's say they start getting a pension. A few years later, they start drawing Social Security. They don't think that the Social Security needs to be reported to the VA. And the VA will come back and say, hey, we're going to cut off your pension and you owe us X amount of money because you've been receiving Social Security. The biggest gap that I've seen so far has been 7 years because the VA and Social Security don't do the best job of speaking with each other and, you know, doing records verification. So this is, you know, one thing we try to, you know, hit home with both veterans and surviving spouses as much as possible. You know, sometimes it works, sometimes, you know, it doesn't. Next slide, please. All right, does anybody have any questions for me?
Okay, let's look at the chat here. I'm not sure if this one's already answered, but I'm going to just backtrack anyway. If a veteran passes away, is it conceivable that her or his family would not have to pay anything and that the VA would bear all costs? Weird question, I know, and depends on funeral home costs and such, but is it possible for a family to pay nothing?
No, the family is going to pay for the costs at the funeral home. The family is going to pay something. That is that one slide that I had. If they passed away from a service-connected disability, they could get up to $2,000 back. And if it was a non-service connected disability, up to the $893 back. And that is one of the reasons that we push the pre-need burial at the VA National Cemeteries so much. Because, I mean, if you go in and look at the cost of a plot and then to open the ground, put the vault in, you know, close the plot and tombstone, that could be close to half of the cost of a funeral right there. So no, the family, I have never heard of an instance where the family does not pay anything. The VA is extremely strict on what they do and will and will not pay for the passing of a veteran, whether it's service connected or not service connected.
Okay, and can their child apply for the benefit if both parents have passed?
The only thing that the child can apply for if both veterans has passed is, or both the veteran and the surviving spouse has passed, would be the reimbursement cost, either the $2,000 if the veteran passed away from a service-connected disability or the $893. Now, the only other thing that a child could apply for if both parents pass is if they were deemed helpless before the age of 18, then whoever, you know, is taking care of them can assist them and get with us to apply for that DIC benefit if the veteran was, you know, passed away from a service-connected disability, or if he or she was 100% service-connected or in receipt of the individual unemployability for at least 10 years.
All right, thank you. And can an adult child with autism be considered a survivor?
Only if they were deemed helpless before the age of 18. And I don't think I've ever seen a case where someone with autism, I mean, I know there are cases of it. I have just not seen any of them where someone with autism was deemed helpless prior to the age of 18. But if they were, then yes, they could apply.
Okay, and if a widowed spouse is not eligible at time of veteran's death, but later becomes eligible due to health care costs, can she or he apply then?
Yes, if they're not, and we do see that frequently where a surviving spouse will come in and at the time that they're meeting with us, you know, they're over either the net worth or the income guidelines. You know, we advise them that, you know, as time goes on, and it's going to happen to all of us, you know, as time goes on, your health gets worse, your finances start to dwindle, then yes, we can definitely look at applying for that benefit on behalf of the spouse.
Okay. And Kat, I'm not sure which question you're referring to, but you said, what about those who want to be cremated?
Well, the cremation costs would be on all of that would be on the family. And again, you know, they could put in for one of the two burial allowances. And if they do want to be cremated, they can still be buried in a national cemetery.
All right, thank you very much. All right, and moving on, our final presenter is Jason Gunther, Assistant Director of the Washington Crossing National Cemetery, who will give us information on burial benefits and services. As the Assistant Director since 2021, Jason is responsible for oversight of all burial, maintenance, and administrative operations of the cemetery and its 4 satellites. Jason began his career with the National Cemetery Administration in March of 2016, serving as an office automation clerk at Washington Crossing National Cemetery. He was since promoted and has served in several capacities to include cemetery caretaker, program support assistant, and administrative officer for Washington Crossing National Cemetery. Additionally, Jason served as a member of the NCA Organizational Assessment and Improvement Team since 2019. Prior to joining NCA, Jason served in the U.S. Army from 2004 to 2012 as an infantryman, deploying twice to Iraq. Jason also served as a U.S. Army recruiter. Jason?
Hey, good morning, and thank you for the invite. And um, thank you allowed me to talk about burial benefits and to piggyback off of the last presentation. Go to the next slide. So a lot of people want to know who's eligible for a burial. So to go back to what we talking, the last presenter was talking about the VA 40-1007. Just want to give clarification. The pre-needs eligibility is not a form or approval for burial. According to the U.S. Code, in order to be eligible for burial benefits, it has to be at the time of need. The pre-needs determination pretty much advises you of the benefits you can get based off of your service. But just for reassurance, if you receive any compensation from $0 to 100, if you are service connected, you are eligible for burial. There are some caveats for capital crimes and sex offenses, but that's why at the time of need, which usually takes about a day, your funeral home or the family would contact the National Scheduling Office, and they would provide determination of eligibility right away for the family. There's not a long wait. It's a very efficient process, maybe the fastest process in the government. But I just want to let you know the VA 40-1007 does not make you eligible for burial when you fill it and send it out. It is accurate, but by law, they cannot prove burials until the time of need. So, who else is eligible for a burial in a VA National Cemetery? Veterans, service members, spouses, dependents may be eligible for burial in a VA National Cemetery. Any child that dies prior to 18-year-old or up to 21 and they're in full-time college is eligible to be buried with their parents in the National Cemetery. If an eligible veteran passed and he's buried in a private cemetery and the spouse didn't know that the National Cemetery existed or a new one was built, the spouse can be buried at a national cemetery on the veteran's eligibility without the veteran. Reservists who retire are eligible for burial in a VA National Cemetery. Reservists who served in the war and meet the active duty requirements, where it's not always 24 months because, deployments are not always 24 months or 12 months, are eligible for burial at a national cemetery. Prior to 1980, a minimum of 2 days of active duty if you were called up on presidential orders, and after 1980, a continuous 24 months of service. Next slide. U.S. citizens who served in armed forces of a U.S. ally during wartime may be eligible if they meet both the requirements listed below. Next slide. So what did Washington Crossing offer? We have a full-time guard called like the Guardians of the National Cemetery. That they don't necessarily provide that service at every cemetery, but the Guardians perform the functions of the honor guard. They do taps. They provide support for our ceremonies on Memorial Day and Veterans Day. They've paid for and donated the George Washington Monument that was dedicated in May. They've done many projects with the Travis Manion Foundation to do beautification projects. They paid and purchased flag poles that are flying throughout the cemetery for a program called the Avenue of Flags, which is an alternative to graveside flag uses. And they maintain that program. They get volunteers to come out and place it up during significant events here. And they also do different forms of visuals for Gold Star families. And they're also responsible for getting the Gold Star Monument dedicated at Washington Crossing, which was the first in the National Cemetery Administration. Next slide. Next slide. I'm skipping some slides because some of this stuff the previous presenter went over. So going back over pre-needs, you can always come to the cemetery and talk to the staff, and we can go over burial benefits with you if you're local. If you want a little more reassurance, because everybody says, well, the government flip-flops, you can fill out the VA form 40-1007 with a VSO like the DAV, or you can also go online at va.gov and do it online. Once you log in, when you search for benefits, you can search under burial benefits, and you'll see the pre-needs determination link. It gives families reassurance, but the biggest planning I'd say that you should do is planning with a funeral home. Funeral homes don't advertise. They do not tell you how much it is. You usually can't look it up or see it on a billboard. So when the family goes to a funeral home at the time of need, while they're dealing with grief, there can be funeral homes that take advantage of families. Not all funeral homes provide the best services to veteran families with dignity and care. So I always suggest meet with funeral homes prior to you getting sick, prior to hospice, to kind of get an idea what is it that you're looking for and what is the cost. Because when you arrange burial arrangements early, you're paying a different cost than may be in the future. And by law in Pennsylvania, funerals are required to any money you give them to put in escrow. So they can't spend that money and they have to guarantee that service. And one of the things you want to look at is the price of pay. If you want to be cremation, which is 50% of the barrels that we do, you want to look at the price. They can go from $500 to $5,000 depending on the funeral home you go to. Most funeral homes are familiar with the process of setting a burial up in a national cemetery. You tell them your wishes, and then they should tell you the exact same benefits that's on the VA website. There's at times funeral homes will say you don't want to trust their vaults, buy one from us. We all buy vaults from the same people, the same companies. In fact, because of the National Cemetery has pre-placed crypts, it offers more supports having pre-placed vaults side by side than traditionally when they place a vault in at the time of need, like they do in private cemeteries and previously did in national cemeteries. So you want to make sure that you know what your benefits are when you're speaking to these funeral homes, so that you know that you're getting your money's worth for the services and the product that they offer. At the time of need, a family just has to contact their funeral director. The funeral director will make all the arrangements. The family can be scheduled within 2 weeks. It's usually not a longer delay than that. And we'll even accommodate for families for religious reasons, to expedite the time if needed, or any religious accommodations that the family may request to happen at the service. Each family is entitled to a 30-minute service where military honors are performed for veterans. The family can speak, have clergy speak, or some families come play music. Whatever, however you want to commemorate your loved one is up to you within that 30-minute time frame. Veterans and spouses are buried immediately after the burial. We do not hold on to remains. It is done completely afterwards. Due to the nature of the business we work in and safety operations, we generally do not permit witnessing of burials. Upon request, we can accommodate, but due to the amount of services we do and the nature of having multiple grave sites open, we do not operate like a traditional cemetery, and everything is based on timeliness so that we can maintain the appearances and beautification standards that are expected us to serve our veteran community. Next slide. So how do you schedule a burial for a veteran or a family member? The, the main thing is having that discharge. A lot of times a family does not have the DD 214 or don't know where it's at. That'll delay the process because the scheduling office will have to do research to obtain the document. The National Personal Record Center could take 2 to 3 weeks to return documents, and NCA gets them in expedited form. I always suggest placing the document in a folder, let the children or a loved one know where that folder is at, and at the time of need, that document will be provided to the funeral director. If a family's planning on a cremation and they can make these arrangements themselves just by faxing and or emailing the DD 214 and the death certificates to the National Cemetery Scheduling Office. After a 5-minute wait, you just give them a call, follow the prompt to schedule a burial. They'll ask you some questions to build a case file, and then they'll ask you if you would like to schedule. They'll also provide you the information for your local military honor guard who will come out and present the flag at the committal service if that's what the family wants. The family can always schedule military honors at the church or the funeral home. It is their option. Full military honors is only provided to KIA and retirees. For every other veteran, including reservists who may not be eligible to be buried in National Cemetery, the military will, at the minimum, fold the flag and present tabs. For veterans that have dependent children that are dependent upon them for care, which means they are unable to be married, unable to work full time, they need a letter from a doctor stating the nature of their disability. And they also need a letter from the caregiver stating when they became disabled and the limitations of their disability and that they're unmarried. You can do this in advance along with the pre-needs form and to get a letter from the VA, or at the time we need, you can do it. It generally does not take more than a week to get an answer on requests like this. Next slide. Now, at Washington Crossing, we offer numerous types of burials. We have traditional casket burials where every family gets a crypt for a husband. It can accommodate 2 caskets for a veteran and their spouse. We, like I said, we offer pre-placed crypts here, but we also have grave sites for people that would love to purchase or want to purchase their own vaults, or that are disinterring their loved ones from a private cemetery and bring them here in a vault or container. For the casket barrels here and cremation barrels in the ground, we have upright headstones. We also have a cemetery in New Jersey in Finn's Point, which only does cremations, and they have flat markers as the stones instead of uprights. Next slide. We also have what is called a columbarium wall. It's a fairly new in the United States. The urns go on the wall and you get a marble plaque with the military information. The wall can accommodate up to 3 urns depending on the size of the urns. If you're interested in it and you're pre-planning, some people go and buy their urns early. It is not uncommon. You can always stop in the office and we have a test kit where you can see if the urn you purchased would fit in one of the columbariums. The columbarium is an option a lot of people like. Majority of our cremation burials are in the columbarium. It's new. It's out of the elements. People donate benches there. People will sit and reflect on their loved one, and everybody likes something new. Next slide. Next slide. Now, as far as cremains in the ground, it is just like a casket burial. You get an upright. It can accommodate 4 cremations. The veteran goes on the front of the stone. The spouse goes on the back of the stone. Veteran married to veterans are entitled to their own gravesite if both of them are qualified. They will notify us at the time of the death of the first veteran that they are married to a veteran and that they are requesting a set aside grave. You can still choose to be in the same graveside with your loved one if you both are veterans. That is your choice. And the military information would be on the back of the stone. And it usually goes by the whoever passes first is on the front of the stone. Next slide. Do you have any questions?
It looks like the questions that we did have were already answered by some of our other presenters here. There's one that just showed up. Could a sibling veteran be buried together?
That's a good question because it comes up a lot. I have three brothers that were in the military. It can happen, and it does happen here, father and son, or brothers and sisters. Technically, there's no family plots allowed in National Cemetery. But if veterans were deciding they were going to be cremated, then they could hold on to the cremains, schedule together the same day, request that the intern be buried side by side. And what we'll do is, yes, we will bury those veterans right next to each other, as long as it is not like if there was one grave site next in the section, we couldn't make an accommodation because then we're asking someone to move to a whole new section just for it. But if we have space right next to each other, we will do it. And we have done it in the past. We have 2, 3 people next to each other. And another question with that, there are people with multiple spouses, they remarry. If you remarry and you have another spouse, they would be eligible to be buried in National Cemetery as well.
All right. And then it looks like this question was already answered, but I'll ask it again and then also read the answer that was put into the chat. I have a friend who is a Navy veteran. His son had a small service. The other children refused to attend as they didn't want to be liable for any funeral bills. His son was unable to get a headstone or placard. Where would they apply for that? And it looks like Tim answered, a headstone or a placard can be requested by completing VA Form 401330. DAV can assist with this.
And it is correct. The DA can assist with it. And it'll actually help you out because they get a lot of applications, and occasionally I get customers will reach out to me. Even though it's not our department, I'll reach out and try to get that moving for them. But the DAV is the best person to help you because they will make sure they follow up until the headstone is set.
Okay, and I just wanted to clarify on the question regarding sibling veteran burials. I meant, can it be buried on the same plot if they were both cremated and they requested it?
So there's another request that happens. Now, if the veteran is married, let's say the grave kite can accommodate 2 people. The veteran, they're unmarried. So 2 brothers that are unmarried that'll be buried together. That we do make that request. Upon request, we do approve that. But if there are times when a veteran wants to be buried with a father or a sibling that their spouse may not be able to be buried with them, so we will notify them. Yes, we can approve this request, but the grave site will not be able to support your spouse being buried with you. If they are okay with that, then we'll make the accommodation and bury them with their sibling.
Okay, and can cremains be interred in any military cemetery?
Cremains can be interred in any national cemetery that has space for cremains. There are some national cemeteries like Beverly that has no more space and only has reserved graves. Just like Finn's Point. At one point, Finn's Point was a post cemetery that did caskets. There's no more space for caskets, but there's space for cremation. So soon as if the National Cemetery has space for cremains, when the funeral home calls the scheduling office will let them know what their options are for national cemeteries in their area and any specific national cemetery that they ask questions for. And yes, the rules are the same for Indian Town Gap and National Cemetery and Washington Crossing. There are minor variations, maybe due to how many services you do. Some cemeteries have shorter service times, but far as burial options, we both offer the same burial options.
All right, those are all the questions right now. Okay. All right, thank you for that presentation. So now we will share with the presenters the questions that the audience has placed in the chat box. Were there any questions that were missed in the chat box? Oh, there's one that actually just popped
Yeah.
up.
So Arlington is run by the Department of Army. They have separate rules. Some of their rules are similar, but it's separate organization. I would suggest going to their website to see specifically what their rules are. And there's also a waiting period for those wishing to be buried in Arlington.
Okay. And were there any other questions in the chat box that were missed?
Jason, did you address the question about Fort Indian Town Gap?
Yes, I answered that question. It's practically the same benefits. Their service times may be different due to the quantity of service they may do in a day. There's the same exact rules for every national cemetery, except for what they may offer as a product, far as the burials.
Larry said outstanding presentations.
On top of what Jason just told us all about, if a veteran has been cared for in a VA medical center, whether it's in the hospice and palliative care unit or in the VA medical center, and wants one of our chaplains to preside for funerals or graveside services, then contact the Office of Chaplaincy or start with the palliative care cell phone and we'll get you in touch with somebody.
Or are there any other questions for any of the presenters? All right. Looks like those are all the questions.
Excuse me, I just had a question there for the, if the National Society Daughters of the American Revolution wants to do some of the cards for the veterans in the end of life, and there was something else that they sometimes did or made blankets or anything, who do we contact, and is the contact different if we're in Delaware County?
For the VA itself, if you want to donate cards or blankets, you can go through the, it used to be voluntary services, but now it's called the Office of, Fern, help me.
Yeah.
Community engagement and something.
Something, yeah, I remember it changed. So we did donate stuff to VA, but I was just thinking for the palliative care. And so for the VA hospitals, that will work. Does Coatesville have a lot, do you know?
I do know that Coatesville is opening their hospice unit again. I don't know the timing or how many veterans they'll be able to accommodate, but they are opening again.
And they would be able to provide us with a list of anybody in Delaware County that would need these things also, I guess.
I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay, I'll check with them. Thank you.
Good to go, Kaylin?
Yeah, looks like we're all good with questions in the chat.
This was awesome. And so thank you to all the presenters. This was an area that I know nothing about. I like to think I'm pretty well versed in the veteran space. But this was eye-opening for me. And what I will throw out there, so to the various presenters, can you please send us any kind of checklists that you have around all of this? Because I don't want to promise that DVVC will do this, but there's so much information that we just went over, that consolidating that. So I mean, just thinking for me, what is it that I need to tell my family? What is it that I need to prepare for my family? What does my family need to do in preparation for when I pass? I mean, I think I'll live forever, but obviously won't. So all of that kind of consolidated, both for the veteran or service member, and then for the family. So I would ask the presenters, if you don't have a checklist like that, I would ask that you create one. And what DVVC will try and do within our team is figure out a way to kind of consolidate that. So it covers hospice, it covers burial, it covers legal things that people need to think about. I think all of this information made my head swim, and being able to consolidate it into not one document, but some kind of one-stop shop I think would be very advantageous. If anybody knows if that list already exists, please let us know, because I think that would be very, very informative. Before we finish up, okay, so any more questions for any of the presenters before we wrap this up?
Yep, there was one question that just came through. Does the VA accept body donations?
Not sure exactly what that means.
So when you say body donations, do you mean donations of somebody's remains for the use of science?
Yes, that's what I mean. I know some institutions do accept like the whole body. Besides, you can do organ donation and then whole body for science.
When we've had people in our hospice unit donate their bodies to science, we've gone through the humanities gift registry or something similar to that. The VA doesn't.
I think hospitals or learning institutions probably would accept body donations, but we can research that. Thanks for that question. Any other questions around this topic? Thanks again, everyone, and enjoy your summer. We'll still be around for a little bit if anybody has questions or comments. But again, thank you to our presenters. Kaylin, great job. Thanks for moderating, and have a great rest of the summer. Thanks, everybody.